back on the Zero Hour. I, as always, am your host, Richard RJ Eskow. My next guest recently testified before a House subcommittee on the topic of Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. She joins us now. She's been with us before. She's a good friend of ours, good friend of the programs. Lisa Graves is the executive director of True North Research. And without any further ado, Lisa, welcome back to the program.
Oh, thank you, Richard. Thank you for inviting me on.
Always a pleasure. Although I should put that in plural, the topics we discuss are not always the best. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And speaking of topics that may not be the best, Louis DeJoy is the Postmaster General appointed by Donald Trump. You recently testified regarding his performance in office, I guess, and his general character. How would you summarize your conclusions for the House?
Sure. My conclusion is that Congress should call on Louis DeJoy to resign or be fired. He is the wrong man for this job, and the circumstances under which he was appointed are very troubling. His actions as Postmaster General these last couple of months have caused dramatic adverse consequences for millions of Americans in terms of their mail being delivered late, including vital prescriptions for veterans and seniors. And he also has an extremely troubling background and track record. And so any one of those things would be disqualifying, but he's sort of got the trifecta of them. And it's very disturbing that this man is at the helm of the Postal Service in the midst of this pandemic. And as we are about to have the national elections. And so I think everyone needs to be doing everything they can to call on the board to urge them to fire him and to put pressure on for him to be fired or resign, because he should not be at the helm of the Postal Service right now or ever.
And just for background for our audience, United States Postal Service is the longest existing government institution. It's written into the Constitution. It's a fundamental part of our nation's character and services. And for people who don't know, it's now governed by a board, as you mentioned, and it has changed. Its legal status has been changed somewhat, but it was never meant to be a money-making enterprise. It's something that provides vital service to the public. So what is unique, if unique is the right word, for Louis DeJoy's appointment to run it?
Sure. I mean, it is the most widely regarded, most popular government agency in America. In fact, it's the most popular brand in America. And postal workers are highly valued by the American people for the job they do day in and day out, and making sure the mail comes to their homes, whether it's in a rural community or in the big cities. And what's happened is that late last year, the Postal Service Postmaster General announced that she was going to be retiring. And after she did so, this man, Louis DeJoy, suddenly, over the course of just a couple of weeks, a span of weeks, donated more than $600,000 to help Donald Trump win his reelection, this election in 2020. He'd been tapped by Donald Trump before to be the deputy finance chair for the RNC alongside Donald Trump's fixer, Michael Cohen, and another man who resigned in a disgrace, a friend of Donald Trump's, who resigned in disgrace over a sort of a hush money payment. And so then what happens is that this spring, his name was put on the list, a list of candidates that did not come from the search firm that was hired to vet and forward names to the Board of Governors. The Board of Governors is basically operating at diminished capacity. The person, every single person on that board right now has been put on the board by Donald Trump and approved, in essence, by approved by Mitch McConnell's Senate. So it's entirely Trump appointed. At the time the appointment was made, the chair of the board, who's still the chair, is a guy named Mike Duncan, who is a right-hand man to Mitch McConnell, who's helped him raise tens of millions of dollars to keep Mitch McConnell in power. He's the one who put Mr. DeJoy's name on the list, and basically steered the decision-making process toward approving him. The other people on that board, it was operating at sort of fewer than half of the Senate confirmed appointees. And at the time that the decision was made to choose him, only one of those members was a Democrat, and the others were Republicans. The former Inspector General who was on the board resigned before the vote was had because he said he had concerns about where this was headed. And three of the board members had only been on the board for less than a year at the time of this decision. How they are making decisions about the future of this agency with so little experience themselves as part-time board members. It includes a bunch of investment bankers, this small group. But they basically chose him, and there was clearly pressure from this administration in terms of who should be on that board. Steve Mnuchin has his fingerprints all over this, and there's more about that, Richard, in terms of banking as well that I want to talk about. But so you had a very political person, the most partisan person as chairman of the board, choosing the most partisan person in modern history since the 1970 reforms to be at the head of the Postal Service, someone who specifically has raised millions for Donald Trump to try to win in 2020. And he himself has donated more than $600,000 to help Donald Trump's and his campaign strategy since December of this past year.
So I want everybody listening to sort of make a mental bookmark at this point about the fact that the guy running the post office has put money, real money, into reelecting Donald Trump. So that's clearly one of his life goals because that becomes relevant. But before we go there, I want people to understand that you, Lisa Graves, in addition to your own work in investigative journalism, among other things, you're an attorney. You, if I recall correctly, worked for, was it the Senate Judiciary Committee, where you looked at appointments and nominations and that sort of thing. So I would assume you have a pretty deep background in the history of the kinds of people who get appointed, whether it's to judgeships or other positions. And to me, all of this, the post office board and the appointment of DeJoy strikes me as banana republic stuff. But I'm obviously not as grounded in it as you are. So is this as extraordinary and frankly sleazy as it sounds to me? Is it really that bad?
Yes, it is. In fact, I started working on vetting potential nominees back in 1998. I worked for the Justice Department in part on that role, and I was sort of the staff leader in the Office of Legal Policy, advising the Assistant Attorney General and the Attorney General on whom to recommend for lifetime positions on the federal court. That included reviewing FBI background investigations as well as conducting our own investigations of those potential candidates whose names had been submitted by political people as potential candidates, and recommending no on some of those candidates, that they were not fit for the job. And then, as you point out, when I was the chief counsel for nominations for the Senate Judiciary Committee, my entire job was basically investigating and analyzing the backgrounds of candidates for these high posts. And when you look at Mr. DeJoy's background, it's shocking. I can't believe that the board, even the partisan board led by a super partisan, ultra partisan chairman, would have approved a man with the background I'm about to tell you about had they known. If they knew and they approved him, they should also all be removed, quite frankly, from this post. But investigative journalism, basic review of campaign finance records, basic review of Lexis litigation history reveals a very troubling background for this guy. And here's a couple of the things. One is there was an actual Inspector General investigation by the Postal Service of his company, the company that was known as New Breed Logistics, or New Breed, that was sold to XPO Logistics. That company, New Breed, was investigated by the Postal Service for getting no bid contracts that cost the American taxpayers tens of millions of dollars, perhaps up to $53 million or more. That was basically money that should not have gone to his company. That should have been a major red flag. Mr. DeJoy also, according to investigative reports by newspapers, treated his employees terribly. For example, his employees have stated that in the North Carolina summers, he refused to turn on the air conditioning in these big warehouses to save money, basically to enrich himself. I don't know about you. I've been in the South in the summer, and the idea, it's like literally a sweatshop.
Right.
Like what would be a sweatshop? That is almost a definition of a sweatshop. In addition to his company having a number of employees who've issued complaints about, racial and sex discrimination, not by him himself, but just this past week, I think it was even on Monday or over the weekend, another investigation showed that hundreds, perhaps more than 100 employees gave to political campaigns that Mr. DeJoy was supporting. And they felt that some of them have said on the record that they felt pressured to give to candidates, to political donations, and that people were rewarded if they did so. They were basically reimbursed through their bonuses for helping him donate to political candidates, which, as was attested to in the hearing this week, that's a third rail issue in campaign finance law. You cannot use straw donors. It's illegal if it's proven. You cannot use your corporation to reimburse people who donate to a political campaign that you prefer. And the report indicated that he, through his assistant, his secretary or other chiefs of staff, were basically gathering those donations and tallying sort of who's naughty and who's nice, and figuring out who to reimburse or who to give big bonuses to for helping juice Louis DeJoy's political capital. And that's also in the context of more than 100 years of legal precedent that bars corporations from giving to political candidates. So to have a corporation reimburse these employees has been illegal for decades if it's proven. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's more in terms of his family history and a piece of litigation that I've talked about that I can talk about. Richard, let me pause there.
Yeah, thank you. Lisa Graves is the executive director of True North Research, and we're talking about Postmaster General Louis DeJoy. And Lisa, as you were talking, I kept thinking about the line from the producers, the Mel Brooks movie, where the jury stands up at the end, the jury foreman, and says, "We find the defendant incredibly guilty." But before we go there, I mean, it seems to me that not being qualified for a position falls into two categories. One is that of lacking the requisite background and knowledge required for the position. The other is having conflicts or indicators in your record that suggest that you are not suited by way of character and or you have conflicts of interest. And it seems to me that Louis DeJoy rings the bell on both. That he's actually not only not qualified, he's anti-qualified. He's, and therefore it suggests a number of things to me, including the notion that while the Senate and not the House confirms nominees, surely the House has the power and the obligation, which I think is beginning to do, to look into abuses of government resources. And I want to get into those abuses, but first, just briefly, I mean, I'm correct, right? The House has oversight powers and can call a hearing and demand any information it needs to assess this guy, and the board for that matter, right?
That's correct. And in fact, they have been seeking documents that the board has withheld about the process by which Mr. DeJoy was chosen, any review of his financial holdings, which include substantial conflicts of interest. He has tens of millions of stock, basically between 30 million and 70 some million dollars worth of stock in XPO Logistics, which is a contractor for the Postal Service and a contractor that would benefit from contracts and has benefited. Is a contractor in essence. There's a report that it had an increase in contracts this summer. They have said that they've done nothing wrong, that they had nothing to do with it. It's just the business of the post office. But if the post office starts outsourcing more of its work to the private sector, that company could benefit, and that would benefit Mr. DeJoy. At the hearing, the ethics officials who have reviewed those forms, that particular issue of conflict of interest, namely the former Bush administration official Richard Painter, who spoke at the hearing, said that that type of background would never have been allowed to have the helm of an agency have a direct millions and millions of dollars of investment in a company that directly is a contractor with that agency and would benefit himself is just a red line that should not be crossed. But he also has long-term leases with XPO Logistics, and he has a long-term relationship with a private equity firm that has been involved in helping UPS acquire more logistics companies and helping global firms acquire more logistics companies, and it's even been involved in trying to set up a big set of funds to take on the privatization of pensions. And so, there are a multitude of potential conflicts based on his financial relationships, and that doesn't even include the fact that in 1999-2000 he was accused by his own brother of fraud, of setting up companies without his brother's knowledge that he thought were part of the family business, of signing his name without his permission, which would be called forgery if it were proven as a crime, hiding the mail from his brother in the form of the bank statements from those three bank accounts, a bank account with Bank One, BB&T, and with an investment firm, hiding the mail from his brother for accounts that were in his brother's name.
So, if his brother
background.
Yeah, if his brother's telling the truth, losing mail is something that Louis DeJoy does in fact have experience in, so which may prove germane to, I'm being a little flippant, but not entirely. And again, Lisa Graves, for those who might not know what a logistics company does, or for that matter, what New Breed, that corporation where he was, abusing workers really with no air conditioning. What is a logistics company like XPO Logistics, and what is New Breed?
Well, it's a $20 word basically for delivery, for
Right.
different elements of delivery and coordinating delivery. And I think it's sort of a vogue term these past couple of decades for describing the process of delivering goods and packages and letters. And so New Breed started as a trucking company, and then expanded its operations with the help of the brother who said he was defrauded. They settled that case, by the way, with a secrecy agreement, and Louis DeJoy denied any wrongdoing. But in fact, what that company did was also have contracts for cleaning and repairing, like cleaning the mail bags and the bins and repairing them, in addition to aiding with logistics. And XPO Logistics, the firm that took over his firm, that he sold his family firm to, that company has global logistics contracts and many contracts in the United States. Some of their business is not competitive with the Postal Service, like delivering sort of white glove service for delivering your refrigerator.
Right.
But other parts of its business are competitive. And in fact, XPO Logistics has talked about its role, the role it plays when there's a surge in mail delivery around the holidays. And so it could very well be a company that participates in helping to deal with the surge in ballots. We don't know that, but that's the role that it has played in the past, is helping the Postal Service with holiday delivery.
So best case bad scenario is that Louis DeJoy has a significant financial interest in a corporation that currently benefits through its contracts with the post office. Worst case scenario, a bad scenario, because they're all bad, is that if Trump and the Republicans were able to privatize the Postal Service, it could enormously further enrich Louis DeJoy, right? Because he stands to gain. The less the post office does, in a way, the worse the service of the post office is perceived as being by the public, a greater political pressure to privatize it, the more he could potentially become much richer than he is now. So it seems to me you have, a classic fox guarding the henhouse sort of situation here. And then adding to that, he has an enormous, if I understand correctly, an enormous motivation to manage the post office in such a way, A, that perhaps not all mail-in ballots will get delivered, and B, that there will be a considerable doubt cast perhaps with no validity, but considerable doubt cast on the outcome of such an election, of kind of offer an opportunity, let's say if Trump loses, for him to claim that there were so any problems with the post office, seems to me, Louis DeJoy might have a political interest in amplifying. Is that fair?
Well, I think I was going to say you described one worst case scenario, and there are a couple of worst case scenarios, and the one I was going to mention is the election. Why were they so determined to get this guy installed at the helm of the Postal Service right now at this time? That's very troubling. The Postal Service was actually delivering mail on time as the pandemic was rising, with no one in that, in his position. In essence, the Postmaster General had indicated she was going to step down. The career staff was working, but when Louis DeJoy came in, he fired nearly 24 experts within the Postal Service, or demoted them, removed them from their positions. So immediately got rid of people who have significant experience. The deputy Postmaster General stepped down, basically resigned. You had the Inspector General who had been on the board, the former Inspector General who had been on the board had resigned. And then you had him issuing edicts, like this idea that he was going to, quote, cut costs by demanding the mail trucks leave without all the mail sorted and in those trucks. And then he was bragging about how successful he was, and it was through his orders at, quote, on-time departure. Meanwhile, the actual delivery of the mail dropped significantly. Millions and millions of pieces of mail have been delayed on his watch due to these policies that are described as cost-cutting, but which in fact have created chaos and caused mail to accumulate. There was a powerful story in the Los Angeles Times about the death of chicks and other animals that typically transit in the Postal Service in the amount of time that has been expected until Louis DeJoy got a hold of the reins. And then all those expectations of the amount of time it takes to deliver went out the window. And so I have serious concerns about the role Postmaster General Louis DeJoy would play in this election, how he's going to deploy the staff of the Postal Service in this election, what he might say or do in the course of this election, because as you said, and as I have said as well, he has spent enormous sums of his own money to try to help get Donald Trump reelected, and he's helped raise enormous sums of money from other people to try to help get Donald Trump elected. And so by any measure, he should be disqualified from this role of having a role, any role, in the say about how the Postal Service operates in this election in the midst of this pandemic.
But of course, Lisa Graves, how do you do that, right? I mean, if the guy, as long as the guy's Postmaster General, potentially every decision he makes, it seems to me, could affect the mail-in portion of the election, which is going to be gigantic. It seems to me the only solution that restores integrity to the process is to remove him. Am I missing something?
No, you're not. I agree. His background is, in my view, just as a matter of fact, disqualifying. And so I think people need to be contacting the local post offices and telling them that this man should be removed, that he should not be the Postmaster General, and how can they help save their local post office? How can they help ensure that their local post office has what it needs to play the role it has played historically in our elections, in our republic? And they should be telling that board, even though that board is stacked with Trump appointees, that they want him fired. This man should not be the Postmaster General of the United States, and his continuing presence at the helm of the Postal Service only further diminishes the Postal Service's reputation and people's confidence in the Postal Service as a nonpartisan entity devoted to all of us equally. In fact, he point blank refused to restore the machines that were removed on his watch. There were, massive mail sorting machines. Last year, or the average in the previous 4 years, is about 385 machines are removed per year due to obsolescence or changing priorities. On his watch this summer, more than 700 machines were removed, almost twice the amount of the previous 3 years. And he's refused to allow them to be re-plugged in. And he has not stopped this push to have the trucks leave without the mail, like talking about planes leaving on time while leaving a bunch of passengers behind. Great, not great. Great, not great.
Right.
And the related piece, I just want to flag while I've got your attention, Richard, is that he's also been working closely with Steve Mnuchin, who has his own track record of terribleness, having himself enriched himself through the last financial crisis in terms of the foreclosures in California and other places. But Steve Mnuchin has been basically pushing people onto that board, basically choosing people who are on that board, trying to exert an extraordinary role on behalf of this president on that board, and in fact has been obstructing efforts by Congress to get the Postal Service the funds it needs to deal with coronavirus, which has affected the Postal Service like every other business and family in America, I suppose, except for the richest billionaires who've gotten richer. But Louis DeJoy is playing politics with the Postal Service. He refuses to seek the relief that the House is providing that was at the request of the Postal Board previously and of the former Postmaster General.
And Mnuchin, who, by the way, is absolutely like a textbook case of a cartoon villain. I mean, he literally foreclosed on an elderly woman over a 32-cent discrepancy in her mortgage payment. He, as I recall, wanted, instead of allowing Congress to give the Postal Service the money it needed, it wanted it to be a loan at usurious terms that the post office would have difficulty paying back, which could easily lead to more calls for privatization and so on. So you really, as an editorial comment, like that's something new for me, but as an editorial comment, these are just bad people to me. I mean, it's just, I rarely judge like who's good and who's bad, but these just aren't nice people. These are just rotten. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's actually in some ways Trump's evil genius is his ability to attract the most venal, least qualified people to key positions in our government. Not the best people, but people who have terrible track records and who have are working in essence to dismantle the agencies or limit the power of the agencies that they are at the helm of, including Betsy DeVos. You mentioned foxes guarding the hen house. I mean, it to me, it's a little bit more like termites in charge of the treehouse, because you have a treehouse at the end of it. With a fox, at least you have still the hen house. You may not have any hens, but this is structural dismantling. And the fact is that there are other things underway that are very, very troubling as well, which is we know that Louis DeJoy has met with JP Morgan Chase about the possibility of putting ATMs in all the post offices. That sort of contract could have enormous benefits for JP Morgan Chase, which received a substantial aid from the American taxpayer during the bailouts of the last crisis and has its own, checkered past. But also, we know from a close review within the public interest of concession contracts or outsourcing contracts that they often come with non-compete clauses. And so this could be a backdoor way of them trying to prevent the Postal Service from taking up the banking role that it played historically, by basically limiting the ability of the Postal Service to offer similar services in terms of what the ATMs provide. We don't know that, but who's scrutinizing that contract and who will be able to see it? How long would such a contract even be let for, and what are its terms? And that's an instance in which the banks would be taking fees and maybe giving a pittance comparatively to the Postal Service versus the Postal Service having the banking that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and others have proposed.
Well, that's the postal banking idea is a great idea. That's a sort of an evil genius twist there, if that's what they're going after. And it wouldn't surprise me. Lisa, you said something a minute ago. You said that people can contact the members of the Postal Board, but you also said that people can contact their local post office. How would that work? Would they just call and ask for the manager or the postmaster, or who do the how physically step up, concretely, how would they do that?
I think there are a couple of ways. They can definitely call their local post office and ask to talk with the postmaster, or ask to leave a message for him or her. They can, if they can safely go to the post office, they can ask to talk to the postmaster and say they're very concerned about these changes by this person and his how he was appointed and what he's doing to the Postal Service. They can ask the local postal workers how they can support them. What would be helpful. to support their efforts to try to save the Postal Service and protect our elections. And there have been a number of movements that the Grand Alliance and a number of the unions and others have put together to go and have people come together safely distancing and with masks on to stand up in favor of the Postal Service and to stop it from privatization and to protect the election, protect and secure a fair election. So, but I do think people can definitely contact their Postal Service, their local post office. And also, these are assets in every community in our country. There's no reason why these are not the type of things that should be invested in by Congress. Like, we should have fantastic postal facilities. And in fact, they can perform other purposes. For example, they could be expanded to make sure that they're a polling place in elections. If we have nonpartisan leaders at the helm of the Postal Service, they can be distribution points for COVID relief efforts. There was an effort just reported in the Washington Post this morning about trying to have the Postal Service help deliver masks and PPE to people in this pandemic. And so they've been deployed in other crises like Katrina to help ensure that people have access to food and water. And it's also the case that the purchasing power of the Postal Service could be used to help really expand the effort to green our economy, to help strengthen our economy. When the federal government bailed out Chrysler back in the late 1970s, early 79, 80, when Charles Koch was opposing that bailout back then. But by the way, of course, but one of the things the U.S. government did as part of helping Chrysler was also agree to buy Chryslers as part of the fleet for the government. The Postal Service could make a substantial investment with the support of Congress in greener vehicles to help move us toward the economy we need to deal with the climate change crisis that has literally set America on fire.
Yeah, I think those are all great ideas. So it sounds like, in addition to maybe contacting the post office itself, people should reach out to their representatives, to their senators, and tell them they want to restore the post office and its integrity, which means new Postmaster General, and they want to see it expanded. Is that a fair conclusion?
Yes, which includes calling on Louis DeJoy to be fired or to resign. Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I don't care which, as long as he's gone. So, Lisa Graves, where can people go to find out more about your work?
Yes, so my main website for my research is truenorthresearch.org, and we have a new project that I founded called the benfranklinproject.com, benfranklinproject.com, where we'll be providing people with actions they can take, in their communities and nationally to try to help protect our democracy and help save our postal service.
Oh, that's great. I'm all for that. So when people told you to fly a kite, you started the Ben Franklin Project, huh?
Yes.
Well, that's great. I will check that out myself, because I think the Postal Service is not only a great thing for the country, but I also think it's symbolic of what public service and good government does for all of us. So.
Yes. And in fact, the Postal Service has been a tremendous unifier in America over time, through war, through crises, through good times and bad, and it also has provided a substantial leg up for workers to lift up their financial condition. Generations of people have been able to get their kids into college based on good paying postal jobs. The Postal Service is the second largest civilian employer in the United States. The biggest employer is Walmart, which pays people such low wages that they rely on government supplements to help ensure that they can make the bills. The Postal Service has been funded almost entirely by people buying stamps, first class postage, sending mail, and also packages, the package business that's been so vital during this COVID crisis. And it's asking for a small amount of money in the grand scheme of things to help it survive and thrive. And that's the $25 billion that's in the House bill, the HEROES Act, and the standalone bill, which this administration is trying to stop. And we also need that terrible law from 2006, which we talked about last time, that put this huge debt burden, this unprecedented debt burden on the Postal Service, repealed. Those things would also help immensely.
And let us not forget, it's also a unionized labor force. So with all that in mind, Lisa Graves, as always, thanks for your great work. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you, Richard. A joy to talk with you. Thank you.
Same here. Talk soon. And we will be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is the Zero Hour.